in the blank, you're not getting any younger, so
You might as well enjoy life as much as you can right now.
hey you, yes you, welcome to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast, a podcast for people who want to disrupt their lives for a good reason, to make it count. I'm your host, Jen Glantz, and every week I'll drop a new episode with stories from real people just like you, who woke up one morning and decided to make big changes, starting with small things. We'll cover topics like entrepreneurship, love, failure, and self-care. Hey, you're not getting any younger, so let's make this an adventure. Ready? Hello, what's up, any youngers? Jen Glantz here today, back with another episode. Hey, I'm grateful that you're back here too. It means so much to me that this podcast is on your list of podcasts to listen to. There's so many out there. There are thousands and thousands of podcasts. So thank you again for making this podcast top of your must listen to list. I read a lot of books. It's my favorite thing to do to calm down, to relax, to help me sleep before I go to bed. And recently, I read a book that completely altered my life. It's called 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. And mental strength, I know that's a weird thing to think about, is something that I know I've personally struggled with. I am the most stubborn person you will ever meet. I am sometimes not a forgiving person. I'm a self-sabotaging person. I know that a lot of you think I'm a great person, but there are some things I do that are not mentally strong. When I read this book, I couldn't help but sit there with the highlighter and highlight all of these things inside of the book that I wanted to personally change about myself. And I found myself months after reading the book in situations that in the past I would have acted negatively, that I turned to different things I learned in the book and changed my behavior. And it was fascinating. Now, the author of the book, Amy Morin, is somebody that I have been obsessed with. I follow her on Instagram. I read every single article she writes. And the other day, I was ready to email her. I had a lot of coffee. I was pumped up. I said to myself, I'm in the mood for a good rejection. So I sent Amy an email, asked her to be on the podcast, and I waited patiently for her to say no freaking way. But that didn't happen. She responded, she agreed. I lost my shit. I was like screaming on the top of my lungs. And I am so excited to tell you that Amy Morin, the author of 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do, is a guest on this very podcast today. Let me tell you a little bit about Amy. Early on in her career as a psychotherapist, she went through a series of losses, tragic losses that inspired her to study mentally strong people. She learned that building mental strength is a lot like building physical strength. You need good habits, like the habits you get when you go to the gym, but it only takes one bad habit to limit your progress. That's where Amy came in with this list, and she found that studying people in her office helped her recognize some of these unhealthy habits that can make us all feel so stuck in life. And when she personally gave up these habits, she felt a lot better. So this book, this podcast interview, it helps you figure out how you can stop robbing yourself of the mental strength you need to become your best. My friends, I'm so excited to have her as a guest on the show. And if you like this episode, you love this podcast, leaving us a review on iTunes helps me book more amazing guests just like Amy. So if you could help us out, that would mean a lot. And as always, come hang out with us in the secret You're Not Getting Any Younger Facebook group. Every single thing posted in there is a secret. So if you come in there and you open up to us, you'll be able to access thousands of people who think and feel just like you. So come meet us there already. Amy, my first question to you might be the hardest, but how would you describe what you do to a person you just met at a party?
Oh, that is a good question. I guess I just try to get to know them. I'm one of those, since I'm a therapist, I'm naturally curious about people. So I just try to figure out who they are, why they're there, what they like to do, sort of like their philosophies on life. I tend to ask questions, but try to do it without looking like I'm interrogating somebody as well.
Oh, totally. And that's sort of what I do as a secret introvert. I just go straight to the question game and then it's a little bit, overwhelming, but that's such a great strategy, especially when what you do is so powerful and often complicated to explain. I want to start off by talking about your book, 13 Things Mentally Strong People Don't Do. I told you earlier, it's become somewhat of a Bible to me. It's so weird. I find myself in situations and I think, okay, go back to chapter 3. Like, what did you learn there? Pull that and then change the way I'm thinking. And it's gotten me through so many situations recently. And I want to talk about the concept of mental strength. Talk to us about why it is so important and why people have to have it.
Well, first, I'm honored that you go back to my book and that you found it helpful. When it comes to mental strength, so it's really, there's three parts to it. It's about the way you think, feel, and behave. Sometimes people think it's about maybe acting tough, or they think if you don't show any emotions that somehow you're strong, or if you just push through everything, even though it's really painful, that somehow that's a hallmark of strength. But that's not the case. Mental strength is about thinking realistically. It's not just about positive thinking or assuming everything's going to be okay. It's about knowing that you'll be okay no matter what happens, but that realistically bad things do happen. And the emotional part is about knowing that you can manage your emotions, but that you don't always have to be happy, that sometimes it's about really leaning into the discomfort. So whether you're sad or you're anxious, sometimes you need to honor those feelings, or you need to accept them so that you can heal. And the third part is about your behavior, which is knowing that sometimes you can act the opposite of what you feel. So even though you feel kind of discouraged, the best way to change how you feel is to say, I'm going to get up and try again anyway. Or if you're sad, your tendency might be to just sit on the couch and watch TV, which keeps you stuck in a sad state. So maybe your best option is to say, I'm going to go call a friend and go do something anyway to change how I feel. So it's really about knowing I can behave productively no matter what. And mental strength is important not just because we need to be ready for the worst case scenarios of what might happen in life, but it's really about how do you reach your greatest potential. When you're mentally strong, you can challenge yourself. You can step outside your comfort zone. You can overcome obstacles that you thought you couldn't. And I always tell people your brain underestimates you. It will tell you to give up when you're only like 60 to 80% there. And it will tell you you can't do something. It will convince you that you're not good enough, that you don't belong. And becoming mentally strong is about knowing that your brain underestimates you and knowing that you can do more and that you're stronger than you think and you're more capable and competent than your brain will give you credit for. And when you start really embracing that philosophy, you can accomplish things that you probably never thought you could.
I think it's so fascinating, especially the part about how our brain almost tells us, hey, it's time to give up, but we're so scared to ignore that. So, what is that about people in general that when our brain's telling us, yeah, you can stop, and I'm specifically talking about running. Running to me, I run a mile and then I tell myself, if I run one more step, I'm going to die, and I know that that's not true, but what is it about ourselves that we give into that, okay, my brain's telling me to stop, or my brain's telling me to not change, that we just give into?
Our brain really likes us to stay comfortable because that's easy. That's the easiest thing to do. So, and I have experienced the same thing with running, that your brain will tell you, nope, you can't possibly go any further. And that's a great way to say, okay, I'm going to challenge these thoughts by taking one more step. And when you do that consistently, it teaches your brain, okay, that you are more capable, you're more competent, that you're better than you thought. But it also gives you practice in knowing I don't have to listen to that little voice in my head. I can talk back to it. I can tell myself, no, I've got this, even though my first reaction is, no, you don't. And the more that we challenge those thoughts, the more that we put ourselves out there, the more confident we become that we can handle discomfort, because our brain will tell us, if you apply for that promotion and you don't get it, you'll be embarrassed. And you can't handle being embarrassed. Or if you try to do something and you fail, then you're going to be so disappointed that you can't handle it. And the more that you challenge those kinds of thoughts and you say, challenge accepted, I'm going to go do it anyway, the more confidence you get in, okay, I can handle feeling these uncomfortable emotions. It's not the worst thing in the world. And then all right, even if it doesn't work out, that's okay. I'll be okay anyway.
Yeah, being uncomfortable is such a part of life, and oftentimes when we try to run away from that, it haunts us. And I want to talk about life at 23 for you. Things were going pretty well. You were married, you had a house, you were a foster parent. I mean, that is way more than most people at 23 do and have. And, life was seeming so well. And then a series of things happened for the next couple of years that really transformed your life. So, could you talk a little bit about what happened at 23 that catapulted you into this journey toward mental strength?
Sure. I had just started my career as a therapist, and I thought, this is great. And I'm going to teach people about mental strength and psychological health based on everything I learned in college. And my mom suddenly passed away from a brain aneurysm that same year. And for the first time, my interest in mental strength became personal. I thought, okay, this isn't just about teaching people in my therapy office the stuff I learned in college. I really wanted to know what makes people tick. How come some people go through hard times and they seem to grow from it, but other people go through hard times and they seem like they're reduced by it? I would have people come into my therapy office, and it might be 15 years after they went through some sort of a hardship, but they felt like they were never able to be happy again, or they felt like they just got stuck there. And I didn't want that to happen to me. And so I started figuring out, well, what makes some people different? And I realized it wasn't always about what they did. Sometimes it was more about what they didn't do. People that seemed to still have hope, and they were still optimistic, and they were still interested in moving forward, just didn't have these certain bad habits. And so I felt like I had a wonderful opportunity to study people firsthand, everybody that came into my therapy office, to figure this out. And so I did. I spent years just really examining, okay, what makes these people different? And I would apply the same things to my own life about, okay, how do I get rid of any bad habits that would keep me stuck? And then it was 3 years to the day that my mom died that my 26-year-old husband died of a heart attack. Obviously, at 26, you're not supposed to have a heart attack. He didn't have any history of health problems. And similar to the way that my mother had passed away, he was fine one minute and gone the next. And it was just so surreal to have another loved one who just felt like he disappeared. And to be able to wrap my brain around that loss, and to be a 26-year-old widow without my mom, it was just, to say it was a dark place feels like an understatement. But at least by now, I had a couple of years of practice in grieving and figuring this out under my belt already, and knew that whomever said time heals everything had lied, that time doesn't heal anything. It's what you do with your time that matters. And so I really wanted to figure out, what can I do with my time to make sure that I embrace the pain, I go through it, but I do it in a way that I come out feeling better on the other side. And it took a long time to do that. It was years before I started to feel better. But once I did, I was like, okay, I'm going to create this new life for myself. And in moving forward, I was fortunate enough to find love again. I got remarried, and life was starting to look pretty good. But almost as quickly as that happened, my father-in-law got diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I just remember thinking, this isn't fair. How come I have to go through this again? And I didn't want to lose somebody. I felt like I just spent the last years of my life grieving. I didn't want to grieve again, but sort of as I was sinking into this dark hole, I was reminded, okay, that hosting a pity party wasn't going to be helpful. And so I wrote a list to myself. It was a letter to myself of what mentally strong people don't do. And at the top of the list was that they don't waste time feeling sorry for themselves. And so over the next few days, I read that list to myself as often as I could to just remember, okay, no matter what you're doing, or no matter what you're going through, just don't do these certain things. And it was the things that I'd learned from people in my therapy office over the years. And so I found the list really helpful. I thought, well, if it helps me, maybe it will help somebody else. So I put it on the internet, stepped away from my computer, and never imagined that it would go viral. I thought a few people might read it. It might resonate with them. That was my hope. But 50 million people read the article. And before I knew it, I had a book deal and the opportunity to sort of explain the rest of the story. The article didn't tell the story about why I wrote it. People assumed I wrote the list because I had mastered those 13 things. And it wasn't until the book came out that I was able to explain that I too struggled with all of those 13 things.
Wow, Amy, I just want to say thank you for sharing your story with us, but also just sharing it with the world. I mean, it is such a powerful and deeply heartbreaking story that you share. And I think that it's such a powerful thing to bring to us to show us that this isn't something that you necessarily mastered. You're working on it. We're all working on it. And I heard somewhere that you said grief is healing and we have to go through it. And I found that to be such a powerful thing to hear because people feel uncomfortable around us when we're sad and we feel uncomfortable. And one of the easiest things to do sometimes is just isolate yourself and literally hide in your closet, hide in your bed and not see people. And you were able to take your grief and turn it into something that now can truly help millions and millions of people. And I want to talk about that feeling of being stuck because I've never gone through anything similar to what you have, but everything is relative. And I've gone through grief and I've gone through really, really tough situations where I've taken almost years to get through it, where I have felt stuck. And one of my favorite things to say was, I don't deserve to have fun. And I want to talk about how mentally strong people don't waste time feeling sorry for themselves. But can you talk about the fact that even mentally strong people can feel sad, are allowed to feel sad? Because I want to make that clear. I don't want people to think that you're saying mentally strong people are just positive, they don't feel sadness, they don't feel anything but happiness. So what does that mean to be mentally strong but still be able to grieve and feel sad and feel these things?
Yeah, I think that's an important distinction. I think one of the biggest misconceptions I run into when I talk about this is just that people think if you're mentally strong, then somehow you don't feel pain or that you can ignore it. But that's not the case. It's not about suppressing your emotions. In fact, you have to be acutely aware of how you're feeling to be mentally strong. After all, it takes more strength to maybe shed a tear than it does to pretend like nothing's bothering you, or to reach out and ask for help takes more strength than to pretend you don't need anybody. And there's a big difference between feeling sorry for yourself and just being sad. Feeling sorry for yourself is when you dig in your heels and you think, nobody can help me. My problems are worse than everybody else's. This is awful. Nothing will ever get better. And you stop taking any action to make things better. And it becomes this a vicious negative cycle where you don't do anything to make your life better. You sort of become whiny. You complain to everybody you meet. It alienates you from other people because nobody really likes people who are drowning in self-pity. It's tough to be around somebody like that. And then because of that, you become more isolated, and then you feel so even worse for yourself, and it's this really downward spiral. Being sad sometimes is just about embracing, okay, I feel sad, and acknowledging the reality of the situation. It might be about grieving a loss, maybe a loss of a loved one, but maybe it's about grieving the loss of a job that you had, or grieving the future that you thought you were going to have for yourself when you figure out, okay, I'm not going to become the nurse that I thought I was, or I'm not going to be able to reach certain goals. And being sad is about just sort of honoring what you lost, or acknowledging what you are giving up, or that you're not going to have in life. But it stops short of saying, this is horrible, awful, I can't handle it, my life is going to be terrible. And that's when we start to get stuck, is when we engage in that cycle of self-pity. And I talk about how many good habits you have versus how many bad habits you have. And when it comes to mental strength, it just takes one bad habit to keep you stuck. And I like to say it's like physical strength. If you wanted to become physically strong, you'd go to the gym, you'd work out. But if you really wanted to see results, you should probably also quit eating so much junk food. Mental strength's the same. I encounter people that will have all of these great habits that they're doing, but as long as they're engaging in a bad habit like self-pity, your good habits won't necessarily work for you. They become counterproductive. So if you want to get unstuck, sometimes the best thing to do is just say, well, what are my worst habits? What can I give up? By giving up your worst habit or two, then your good habits will become much more effective.
Yeah, and it was so interesting reading your book because there are 13 things in it, and there were a couple of chapters where I said, yep, Amy nailed my worst habits. And I think, a lot of them were the first couple of chapters, like the feeling sorry for yourself. Like, I think another major one that I experienced in the past couple of years was the comparing and contrasting, and you talk about this in your TED Talk, is that you go on social media and everyone's lives seem so much better than yours, and whether or not they are, that also sort of makes us really enter this vicious cycle of feeling even more sorry for ourselves. So how do we break that? Because I just know that at my lowest, I was even more addicted to social media because of that, just that like negative energy I would get from it somehow made me in a weird way feel even worse about myself, and I enjoyed that. Like, it was this weird mental game. So how do we break away from that?
It is a weird mental game. It becomes this trap of thinking, okay, other people are doing better than I am, and yet you keep scrolling through Instagram or you keep checking Facebook almost for proof. It's like there's
Yes.
a part of our brain looking for evidence that, see, this person has more friends than I do. These people are out there doing more awesome things than I do. And it is a vicious cycle that keeps us stuck. And so I think it's important to recognize, okay, how much time do I spend on social media? And how is it affecting me? Do I feel better? Do I feel worse? And a lot of people that would come into my therapy office, we would get an app or we'd start to talk about how to monitor how much time they spent on social media. And everyone always underestimated how much time they spent scrolling through social media. They thought, oh, 20 minutes a day. But then when they added it up, it was way more than that. It was, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, but they were doing it 10, sometimes 20 times a day, and it was really adding up. And so we talked about, how does that affect your mental health over time? And studies will show that envying people on Facebook is directly linked to depression. And so it's really important, and I'm not against social media. I use social media myself for my business, but it's important to just take notice of, how am I using it? How is it affecting me? How does it influence the way that I think? When I'm scrolling through and I see people who look like their lives are perfect, am I buying into that? Do I lose sight of the fact that people are only sharing their successes and their greatest wins? Am I forgetting that these are human beings who have problems as well? And so I think it's important to remind yourself of all of those things, that just because people look like they're happy, we know behind the scenes, things are usually much different. And two, if there's people on social media that you follow and you tend to feel bad after looking at their images or after seeing what they're posting, maybe you unfollow them. Maybe you follow people who are more realistic. Maybe you tend to follow people who also share their failures, people who are willing to talk about real life problems. And just take notice. So I think it's really about becoming more self-aware, recognizing what our habits are, and thinking, how does this affect me? Is there something else I could be doing with my time? Or is this somehow enhancing my life?
And it seems so simple, and you say it, and I'm like, yes, yes, yes. But yet we enter this like this negative circle of just going back on and back on. And I've recently just deleted all of it from my phone. And I have to say, in the last month of not having Facebook or Instagram on my phone, I've been significantly happier and less, going online to judge people. And that sort of leads me to the number two mentally strong thing that mentally strong people don't do, that I really cling to, was that they don't give away their power. And a lot of what you wrote about in the book and you talk about is how we control us. Other people don't control us. And it was so interesting because I also interpreted this chapter selfishly about things in my life, to talk about how sometimes when I know people don't like me, or I know people aren't so thrilled with me, that truly impacts my behavior, my personality. And this is something that I was thinking about the other day. I was sitting on a park bench and I was just like ruminating over the fact that somebody was over my apartment hanging out with my boyfriend who I knew didn't like me. And I felt like I had to leave the apartment and I had to be angry and upset and all of these things. And I realized I'm giving them my power. So I want to talk a little bit about that number two, is that mentally strong people don't give away their power. What exactly did you mean by that?
Out of all the chapters in the book, this is the one people seem to want to talk about the most, or it seems to resonate the most with people. And I'm thrilled that it did, because it's really about saying, okay, I'm in control of how I think, feel, and behave. And that it's tempting for us sometimes to say, somebody makes me feel bad about myself, or because this person says, invites me to do stuff, I have to do it, I'm obligated to. Or even our boss, we say, my boss makes me work late. And so taking back your power is really about reminding yourself that those things are a choice. And of course, there's consequences. If you didn't go to work, you'd have consequences that you'd face. But just reminding yourself of, okay, I don't have to go to work. It's a choice to go to work. Or I don't have to leave my apartment. I can stay there if I want to. It's a choice, because it becomes so tempting sometimes to blame other people. This person makes me do that, or I can't do this because of X, Y, and Z. And when we get stuck in that, it's about just blaming other people for our circumstances, or thinking that our lives are spiraling out of control because of horrible people who are taking over. And taking back your power is just about reminding yourself, nope, from the time I wake up until the time I go to bed, I'm in control of who I spend my time with, how I spend it, what I'm going to do, what kind of life I'm going to create for myself. And just because somebody around me is in a bad mood, it doesn't have to drag me down. Or just because someone says something mean to me, I don't have to let it ruin my whole day. It's up to me to decide what kind of day I'm going to have and what kind of life I'm going to live as well.
Amen to that. And it was so wild because it tied into the next thing that really stood out to me in your book was that mentally strong people don't worry about pleasing everyone. And I am Miss People Pleaser. What are your top tips for getting people to stop trying to be people pleasers, even if that's who they've been the majority of their life?
It's a hard habit to break for a lot of people. So sometimes it's just about recognizing, okay, I say yes way too often. So when I work with people in my therapy office who just their automatic answer is yes whenever anything's asked of them, we practice changing that script. So, and it doesn't have to be an automatic no, but to be able to say, hey, thanks for that offer. Thank you for the invitation. I just need to check my schedule and I'll get back to you. And then it at least gives them a few minutes to think, is this something that I actually want to do? And then they can craft a response. And the response might be, I'd love to, but I'm not able, I'm busy that day. Or maybe it's just, thank you for the invitation, but I'm not going to be able to do that. And it just becomes practicing and seeing that when you say no to people, they don't automatically get as angry as you anticipate, or they aren't as upset, that they're still willing to talk to you, or knowing that you can disagree with people. I encounter a lot of people who are terrified of confrontation. They see confrontation as a negative thing. It's a really bad thing and you should never do it. And they go through life sort of always playing defense about not making any waves. But confrontation doesn't have to be a bad thing. It can be a really good thing. In fact, it's good for our relationships to be honest and open and to trust somebody enough to say, whether it's a friend, a loved one, maybe even a colleague, but to say, gosh, I'm really concerned about this. And when you bring up that issue, you're saying to them, essentially, I trust that you like me enough that you could be mad at me or that we could disagree, but that ultimately we can still have a relationship of some sort. Because a lot of people pleasers I see, they want to be liked and they want to be come across as selfless, but it's really sometimes about being kind of selfish in the end because they want to be liked and they think that their opinion matters so much that they can't possibly say no to somebody. And so it can be a really kind act to say to somebody, I didn't like it when you did that today, or I'm not going to do that because I don't think it's a good idea. And when you practice doing that, you can develop much healthier relationships. You can reach a new level of friendship. You can dive deeper in your romantic relationships because it does take sort of a level of trust and brings things to a completely new level. And when people start doing that, they figure out, well, life is much better when you aren't always running around trying to make everybody else happy.
This is high up on my to-do list to do, and I appreciate all of your tips, especially the script. I was writing it down. I'm like, I'm going to stop saying yes to things and instead say exactly what Amy said. So yeah, that's definitely something I struggle with a lot. And when I was talking about you and the secret you're not getting any younger Facebook group, I had an overwhelming amount of people come to me with questions for you. So I just want to ask you a couple of questions from people in the group. The first question's from Molly, and Molly says, I would love to know what would be the 14th thing if you could add one more thing to your list of things mentally strong people don't do.
Oh, I've had that question a lot. And for this particular book, I never really came up with like one more thing that I thought I was dying to add to it. But then I went on to write 2 more books. So I was able to write more about mental strength tips. So I don't know that I would add I don't know that I'd add a 14th thing to this book.
Which is such a good segue because you have many other books just like this for parents, for all different types, for women, and we're going to link to all of them in the group on the podcast. But that's what's so great about this platform that you have is that you're able to help so many different types of people at different points in their life. And it's not overwhelming. It is only 13 things. So I'm glad you're keeping it at 13. Caitlin wants to know, do you personally do all of these 13 things or don't do these 13 things?
I have certainly done all 13 things at one time or another, and I still am a work in progress. I think sometimes it's easy to say, well, I don't compare myself to other people. It's easy to do that when you feel like life is going really great. But when I find myself struggling or I've failed at some things, then I start looking around at other people thinking, well, that person's doing better than I am. So I think, to be honest, I still struggle with these 13 things at different times. Some days are easier than others to not do certain things, but that I'm a work in progress.
Yeah, and it's great that you're honest about that too. I think that's one thing that I personally flock to about you is your honesty and the fact that you're not trying to be perfect, but you are trying to improve. And I think that that's what all of us are also trying to do. The last question's from Beth, and she wants to know, how can you help your loved ones become mentally strong when you see that they're struggling?
That's a great question too. I think the first thing is to avoid lecturing or telling people that they need to build mental strength. Nobody wants to hear that. Instead, the best option is to lead by example. You can explain, hey, this worked for me. And that usually comes across much better than, hey, you should do this. You need to change that habit. But instead, talk about what's worked for you, what you've changed, the benefits that you're gaining, how it's helping your life. And then you become more of an inspirational example to people that they naturally want to follow. Our tendency sometimes is we want to fix people. We want to change them. We want them to do better because we see that they have wonderful potential. But, lecturing or trying to motivate them won't work in the long run. So it's just important to say, I'm going to be an example. I'm going to be a cheerleader for you. If there's anything I can do, I'm happy to cheer you on. And when people know that they have a support team, they are much more likely to change versus thinking that you're somebody that's trying to force them to change.
Yeah, nobody likes to be told what to do, especially when they're going through grief. And I'm not even joking when I say this. I have sent copies of your book to multiple people in my life who I desperately knew needed it because they were struggling. And it was my passive aggressive way of saying, you have to read this, you have to pay attention to this, and you have to start doing it. So I personally am very thankful for your book because it's helped me have these conversations with pretty tough people who I think if I straight up said, you have to stop feeling sorry for yourself, you have to stop doing all this, they would be mad at me. So thank you, Amy. I want to ask you one final question. We end all of the interviews with this question. Are you ready for it?
I am ready.
Great. Fill in the blank. You're not getting any younger, so
You might as well enjoy life as much as you can right now.
Oh, I love it, Amy. You are the best. Please tell our listeners where they can find out more about you, your books, and your future projects.
So my website is the best place, which is Amy Morin, LCSW, as in licensed clinical social worker.com.
Amazing. And we'll link to that in the show. Amy, thank you so much again for all of your tips today.
Thanks for having me.
Yay. Hey, you. Thank you for listening to the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast. There are hundreds of thousands of pods out there, so thank you for listening to this one. You can find the show notes for this week's episode up on our website, anyyounger.com. Subscribe, rate, and review the You're Not Getting Any Younger podcast on iTunes so that other ears around the world can listen too. Oh, and join our secret You're Not Getting Any Younger Facebook group, where over 1,000 people are talking about how to disrupt their lives, for a good reason, to make it count. Until next week, all my love, Jen Glantz.